How do you cope with anxious thoughts? We all have our coping methods. Some of the ways that we deal with anxiety are healthy, and others not so much. I bring this up because I have a suspicion that many of us are kind of more aware of our anxiety coping methods now because we're feeling anxiety more frequently. Well, let me ask you a follow-up question. How many people do you know right now who are dealing with significant anxiety or depression? Chances are, every one of you could come up with multiple people without even having to think hard about it. Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics recently issued a statement declaring a national state of emergency in children's mental health. And the statement says, quote, "We are caring for young people with soaring rates of depression, anxiety, trauma, loneliness, and suicidality that will have lasting impacts on them, their families, and their communities." Even the world is recognizing that more and more people are dealing with chronic anxiety. And the Academy of Pediatrics blames the COVID pandemic and racial justice struggles for the increase in mental health issues. I believe that the causes go far deeper than that, but I'm not here to argue that point today. The reason why I bring it up is this. If you feel like you've noticed more and more people, especially younger people, or maybe even in yourself, who are dealing with significant anxiety and depression issues, then you're not alone. Some people are calling it the epidemic within a pandemic. And I bring all this up for a reason, and believe it or not, it has to do with my series on the Lost Art of Friendmaking. Last week I talked about Proverbs 18 verse 21, which says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits." And last week I focused on the dangers of using our words to tear people down. Well, this week I'd like to pick up on that same verse and talk about the other side of it. Do you realize the power of your tongue for speaking words of life? And what does that even mean? Well, listen to this statement from Proverbs 12, verse 25. It says, "Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad." Well, first of all, consider the reality of the first line of that proverb. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down. A lot of people in our churches, in our lives, are feeling weighed down by anxiety. It's not a new thing. Anxiety has always been around. Fear of the future, depression that comes with poor self-image, or guilt over personal failures. Anxiety makes it hard to keep going. It is like a weight that pulls hearts into misery and hopelessness. Now, let me ask you another question. How easy is it to have a relationship with a person who is weighed down by anxiety? It can be difficult, can't it? But what does the second line in the proverb say? Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. Well, does that mean that all you have to do is say the right words and you'll heal a person from their anxiety? Well, no, of course not. But it does mean that our words have power. Our words have the power of life. People who are dealing with anxiety need other people to speak words of life to them. Why? Well, because if we do not speak words of life to them, then all they're going to keep hearing are their own internal words of anxiety. Satan loves to convince people to dwell on words of discouragement, words of death. But when we speak words of life to them, we are shining a bright light of God's truth, which exposes the lies of Satan and the lies of the world. So choose your words to people wisely. Here's another proverb, Proverbs 17, verse 22. It says, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." Is there a better description of a person who's dealing with anxiety than a crushed spirit? Can a person with a crushed spirit have a joyful heart? Well, not on their own. The joyful heart has to be someone else's heart, a friend's heart. Sociologists have long documented the healing power of laughter. Not only our words, but even our mood can be healing. Translated more literally, this verse says, "A joyful heart causes good healing." So Think about this for a moment in the context of your relationships with other people in your church, in your neighborhood, in your work or school environment. You are probably safe in assuming that many of the people you interact with are dealing directly with some degree of anxiety right now. And you have the power of helping to heal and to give life to people who are weighed down by anxiety, simply through your words and your attitude. But that's not the end of it yet. Let me read you one more verse. This one comes from Isaiah chapter 50, and it's the third of 4 servant songs. Who is the servant? Well, we know now on this side of the cross that the servant of the Lord that's being talked about in Isaiah is the suffering servant, Jesus. And in Isaiah 50, verse 4, the servant says this: "The Lord God has given me the tongue of those who are taught, that I may know how to sustain with a word him who is weary. Morning by morning he awakens my ear to hear as those who are taught." There is something very important here for us to understand. Up until this point in this video, you could walk away from this message thinking that the Bible is telling you that it is up to you to speak words of life to crushed heart people. But this reminds us that there is another. Jesus is the one who knows how to sustain with a word the person who is weary and weighed down with anxiety. Jesus hears our weariness. He knows our anxious thoughts. And this is the same Jesus who said in Matthew 11, verses 28 and 29, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." The most important way that we can speak words of healing and life to weary souls is to point them to Jesus. Make friends by speaking in ways that shine a bright light on Jesus. The power of a good word is never more powerful than when it leads crushed hearts to the only one who can truly provide rest for their souls.